Radio.
Hello and welcome back to episode 25 now of the South Bank podcast. Quarter of the way to that century mark. I'm once again joined by the ever-present Cameron Gorman.
Hello.
Weather's nice, but Wolves have lost, so how are you doing?
Not too bad, to be honest. Annoying one to take. Did want to see us obviously go back to winning ways, as do all Wolves fans, but still not a lot to complain about. These losses aren't really feeling that harmful at this stage of the season. We've not got anything to play for. We've just had a great winning run. And yeah, Brighton are still very much fighting for European football, as we were saying for Man City last week. So gives them a lot more incentive to turn up and play. But as we'll get to, that wasn't really the main reason for Wolves losing.
Yeah, Brighton rapidly becoming a bogey team for Wolves. Only 2 wins over the Seagulls in the Premier League since our return in 2018. And wow, you got to think that's not even been the almighty Brighton either. That was 2 or 3 years when we first came up where they were quite a poor side, but obviously that's no longer the case, and they're very impressive and they continue to impress when they play against Wolves. But we'll get into the game now. I actually thought there was a decent pace to the game in the first 10, 20 minutes. It was quite enjoyable end-to-end stuff. A few, well, I wouldn't even say half chances. There were some quite big chances early on. One point to Gonzalo Guedes at the start of a Cunha free kick that he slipped over the bar, which I've seen a lot of people slate Guedes for. I don't think he actually does that bad with the chance. Do you, Cam?
No, I wouldn't agree with the criticism there. I think that's rather harsh. While I'd say that was the biggest chance to open the game, early on, definitely coming from that Mateus Cunha delivery from the free kick. I don't think Guedes has hardly butchered the chance here. It's a very hard one to take. The ball swinging in from much further behind him and over the top of his shoulder. For him to even get contact with the ball, I think, is credit to him. And he was very unlucky to divert it over the net.
Yeah, I fully agree. But for me, where it became frustrating with Guedes was another chance where it was played across goal and he just couldn't get out his feet, could he? I think. I want to start on the topic of Guedes, actually. He was the only change coming into this game. The maybe 10 players you'd expect to see on the team sheet. Usually Strand Larsen in there, but obviously kept out due to injury, it seems, at the minute. So we see Gonzalo Guedes start, and for me, it was a performance that left a lot to be desired from Gonzalo. I don't think he did anything in that number 9, really. I think it was a typical performance of a man who knows his fate is coming to an end at Wolverhampton Wanderers, unfortunately. Obviously a talented footballer, but one who, he doesn't bring what Larsen brings anyway in terms of energy. He's never been like that, but it's a weird case for Gonzalo Guedes, but I don't think he's ever fitted himself into a role at Wolves. I think when he's a winger, we say he's not a winger, he's number 9. When he plays number 9, he doesn't have the almost character and desire to play that number 9 role at Wolves, it seems. Cam, do you think this period at Wolves for Gonzalo Guedes has left more frustrations than it has positives?
Yeah, I'd say that's the case for both sides, both the player and the fans and the club, if I'm honest. Gonzalo Guedes is obviously a very talented footballer. You don't have the career he has had without being as such. However, Gonzalo Guedes, like you say, he struggled to find the right role for himself at Wolves. I personally say the best we saw of him was during the start of this season, when he was playing in that winger role with Larsen and Cunha and Gonzalo Guedes was on the right-hand side. However, it's still just not quite enough. You can tell he's not quite suited to the English style of football that we play in the Premier League. In leagues such as La Liga and Ligue 1, he was flourishing under PSG and Valencia, and he just hasn't captured that same form at Wolves, possibly due to the fact he has always been reportedly unsettled while he's been here, and never really liked living in England. And when you combine that with not adjusting to the football well at all either, I'm not really surprised to see that it hasn't worked out. And it's really one of those signings that I am gutted that it hasn't worked out, because I was very excited at the time we signed him, as were all Wolves fans, because he was a player with a very high reputation at the end of the day. But unfortunately, like a lot of Wolves' high money signings, this one just hasn't worked out.
Yeah, he's been a hard character to really gauge where his head's at, Gonzalo. It seems at times like he didn't want to be here, including initially when he first joined. Um, and then really, like you say, Cam, brought himself into life at the start of this season. I think his goal contribution to minute ratio very good at the start of the season, the best in the team, I believe,
Yeah.
uh, off that right hand side. But his body language has always been one of cannot really be bothered. But I just think that's his demeanour. We've mentioned it multiple times on the podcast. But moving away from Gonzalo as an individual, it seemed like Brighton had took the lead in the 22nd minute through Danny Welbeck, of course. But a tight empty ball in that he helps on. Eventually the goal was ruled out, but after watching it back and how long it took, I thought it was a rather harsh rule out. I mean, he is offside by a fraction. But I remember saying to you in the ground, obviously I'm happy it went forwards in the end, but when they're that tight, that dubious, it's taking 3 minutes off of the game. Honestly, I'd rather the goals be given. I'd rather the attacker be favoured in that thing if we're taking our wolves tinted glasses off and thinking as the game is an entertainment sport. This was ridiculous once again for VAR, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think it also killed any momentum we built in that first half, if I'm honest. Wolves, I'd say we were probably on top up to that point, and it really took any sting out the game. I thought it was very end to end up to that point, and from then on, it kind of became your typical game of Premier League football in my eyes. However, yeah, I thought the offside took far too long to be checked, much to the disgruntlement of the fans in the stadium. Lots of boos, lots of chants of I can't repeat the word, but VAR and boos from both sets of fans disappointed, and it is just ridiculous how long it takes. What I did like is the fact that obviously with the new semi-automated offside technology, it was shown in the stadium the margin of how offside he was. But like you say, ridiculously tight. If anything, by millimeters, it was a fraction. I think it was just like his niece just sticking out, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. I really think it was a harsh ruling, but obviously when it was in our favour, I wasn't exactly going to complain.
Yeah, but for me, offside is gaining an unfair advantage on your opponent by being too far progressed. For me, he's not gaining any unfair advantage on the defender in that situation. He's, like say, very marginally in front. I don't think, to the naked eye, anyone would have called for an offside there. I think it was very, very tight, like you say.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's obviously why people such as Arsene Wenger are suggesting for rule changes to the offside rule, as have been discussed in the news recently. But unfortunately, the rule is the rule. And more fortunately for us, in that case, the goal was ruled out. However, we all know the sky is blue, grass is green, and Danny Welbeck always scores against Wolves. That just didn't prove to be the last of him that day, was it, Jacob?
Yeah, Danny would not have to wait long to get his revenge. It seemed Mateus Cunha bubble wrapping it and selling it to him as a gift. It seemed played to him on the edge of the box, which May first had. Nathan Judah and a few others tweeting out that the ball from Agbadu was poor when there's nothing wrong with the ball from Agbadu. Having watched it back multiple times, he plays it to Cunha, who the press is very good from Brighton, you've got to admit, and immediately two men on Cunha with his back facing the opposition goal. But Cunha still has two options. He can go back to Jose Sarr or back to Agbadu, who would hook it down line. People saying he could have played to Andre. I don't think that would have been the right call, as Andre also had two players around him. But basically do anything but what you did, Mateus. I think victim of his own confidence in this situation where he tries to turn, loses the ball, and in all fairness, he tries to win it back. I think obviously it's a striker's tackle in the final in the box, always going to be a penalty. I don't agree with people calling for red cards. I do think it's a genuine attempt to play the ball by Mateus. I don't think he's gone for it. Immediately apologetic to the South Bank was Mateus holding up his praise and whatever. And I suppose we let him off because of how good he's been this season. But it was really poor from Cunha and a gift of a goal, wasn't it, Cam?
Yeah, 100%. I thought it was just very stupid of him to give that away. I understand he's a player with such high confidence, and he's obviously, evidently, on the pitch been trying to boost his own stock recently, but that's not the way to do it. I really personally do blame him for setting us in the way of that defeat. Thanks to that, I thought was very competitive in the game up to that point. Obviously, great work from Brighton with their press to win the ball. I thought tactically they were very astute, Brighton, very well drilled, very disciplined, and you could tell Herzl had really done his homework on Wolves since Vitor had come in, because they completely crushed us tactically. I didn't think there was much competition there. Wolves really were struggling to find answers to the questions that were being asked of them all evening. But yeah, a silly challenge from Mateus. I don't think he is attempting to hurt the man. Like you say, it's just a poor tackle from a player who's not a defensive player. It's always going to end up being a penalty. However, I think a red card's a bit harsh.
Yeah. And there's also the double jeopardy and whatever you want to read into it when the penalty was given.
Yeah.
But we'll be here all day talking about that, because it's about as consistent as, well, it's simply not consistent. But my question, to be fair, is why is Mateus even in that position? We've got two very capable midfielders in João and Andre who can fill that. Mateus simply does not need to be there, and I don't think João and Andre attempt that turn. I think they would have simply played it off to Agbedu or Sarr. But whether that's been told by Pereira, I don't want to immediately put it on Cunha, because it might be instruction by Vitor. But that was the first half, and like you say, Brighton, very impressive, actually. Really hard to break us down. No, really hard to break them down, sorry. Remind me very reminiscent of the Bournemouth game at home, where they were very good press at the front and very hard to break down going forward. I know we scored twice in that Bournemouth game at home, but for the most part, it was largely frustrating for Wolves. And that carried on to the second half. I think a lot of people at half time in the concourse, the phrase on the beach was being touted around. I don't quite agree. I think we were simply playing a team that were very hard to break down. Were they potentially given that extra 10% for having the incentive to get into Europe? Yes. But I don't think Wolves were on the beach. I don't think that was the reason we lost. I think we were simply beaten by a better team on the day. But we did try to make a fist of it second half. Starting with Mateus Cunha. When you look at it, actual fantastic attempt from outside the box, forcing a very good save out of Verbruggen, who gets down really well. And then minutes later, getting down really well again to take the ball out the path of Strand Larsen from an 8-0 cross. So there was chances within all the frustration for Wolves in this second half, but Cam, something just wasn't working for us the way it has been the last month or so in that final third, was it?
Yeah, honestly, I want to give some massive credit to Jasper Cillessen, not Cillessen, Bart Verbruggen, wrong Dutch keeper. Yeah, absolutely phenomenal saves from him from that Cunha attempt, and he did very well to divert the ball away from Larsen's path, who would have had an easy tap in. Who I didn't think Larsen was that bad, obviously coming back from injury. I didn't expect him to be setting the world alight. I thought he did well in terms of his movement and his pressing when he came on, just to add that. But yeah, I thought Brighton, just defensively, they looked like they just knew how to cope us. They knew what we were going to do before we did it. They really had just done their homework, just to echo that. And they were 2 steps ahead of us all day, I thought, to be honest. But do want to give that special mention to their keeper, and like you say, it's not like Wolves didn't have their chances, but we definitely failed to capitalise on them, and that's ultimately what cost us.
Yeah. So we progress on. At the start of the podcast, with all the, not excitement, but things that have happened since, we forgot to extend our also congratulations to Vitor Pereira for winning the Manager of the Month award. But to curse it again, didn't it? It always seemed to happen to Nuno, where we would ultimately tail off after a Manager of the Month award would be gifted. I'd probably rather we just keep going under the radar and keep doing business and getting this damned award each time. But as the half progressed, actually before the second chance that we've referenced from Verbruggen, 4 changes at once from Pereira. A lot of people stating that this was just to give players a run out, but I don't know. I feel like Pereira could see that we were creating and was trying to bring on his more creative players to find gaps in this defence. I don't agree with taking Mateus Cunha off. But more so, I don't agree with taking João Gomez off, because I feel like that's where the game was lost with the second goal. Ultimately, Andre was given the task of two man's jobs in midfield in the end. I don't know if you agree with that, Cam, whether you think the substitution were right to take off Gomez and Cunha, or were wrong, as I believe.
You know what? I agreed with you at the time, obviously. I actually kind of agree with all of the points in hindsight. I do think taking Mateus off isn't the right decision if we want to get something back from this game. However, when it comes to the fact that he's clearly on the beach, regardless of if the rest of the squad are, he's just playing for his own stock, as we've highlighted in recent weeks. And while he is undoubtedly still our best player, I'm also not against seeing him go off in this game and the next game and the Brentford game, just purely because we've got to get used to playing without him. He's not going to be here, and I'm not wholly against that. I think it's a bit of a both when it comes to players having a run out and Vittel wanting to create attacking changes. Obviously, a lot of the players who struggle for minutes in recent weeks have been our attacking players. Obviously, Guedes coming into the starting role thanks to Larsson's injury. He's not a player we've seen a lot of. Bellegarde, I thought, looked very off it when he came on, in my opinion. I thought him going off for Cunha was like the worst substitution. João Gomez, yeah, I do agree with you on that one wholeheartedly. Taking him off is probably what lost us the game. Brighton were really dominating that midfield already with the extra man, and to take off one of our best defensive players definitely hurt us. However, I do also understand why Vitor did this. We've seen João Gomez or Andre make way on some occasions, and Vitor at that point does have to roll the dice and hope to score a goal by bringing on these attacking changes. So I'm not completely against it either. I understand what he's doing. At the end of the day, it's a bit of a nothing game for us. I'd rather Vitor be making these tactical blips in these kind of games towards the end of this season and figure out what he wants to do and who he can rely on next season, ahead of the big summer that it probably will be for Wolves.
Yeah, there's ultimately this João Gomez-sized hole that led to the second goal. Brighton far too easy to get through that midfield. It actually starts from Bellegarde being probably too weak in a header duel on that side that he probably wouldn't have won anyway. But the attempt, or the lack of an attempt, left a lot of fans frustrated, I think, including myself. But ultimately, there's about two phases of play after that Wolves should do better in. The ball eventually getting through to Gruder, who, phenomenal finish, chipped over the keeper. Beautiful. You would not think it was his first goal in English football. Don't know why he ends up going down crying in the corner. I assume it's the first goal thing, but grow up a bit, mate. But, 2-0 at this point, and there's no way back, is there now?
No, that was definitely the nail in the coffin. I don't know why people are expecting Bellegarde to header when the man has no neck. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how he's gonna jump up and header the ball. He's a small man himself. Like you say, multiple phases of play afterward. I think there was a lot of mistakes coming from the whole team anyway, to positioning wise as well, to end up having a 4-on-2, was it, at one point?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you say, just excellent finish. Composure right there to just lift it over Jose Sarr, who was rushing onwards, and I don't think he could have done any better himself. At that point, rushing towards the ball is probably the best thing he could do to try and narrow the angle down. However, yeah, definitely the nail in the coffin for Wolves, and just kind of summed up our evening almost the way I expected the match to go, after a certain point, but it was always in the script, wasn't it? Wolves never beat Brighton. We get squashed by the Seagulls.
Yeah, and ultimately, the takeaway from that is if Bellegarde had a neck, we may have got something out of his game. Maybe that is the case. But there was a positive at the end of the game. Matheus Mane, after weeks on the bench, finally coming on for his debut in the 89th minute. Too late to really have a massive impact, but showed a lot of desire, a lot of want. Did not stop running for it was 7 minutes added on, wasn't it? So 8 minutes he was on the pitch. Did win a header as well, so turns out he does have a neck and can jump, which is obviously an upgrade on what was there before. Obviously, Blessing not old enough to have the betting sponsor on his shirt, but a lot of hype surrounding this guy. And I think bringing him on is a good statement to the youth that you put this work in, you will get a chance. Vitor Pereira at other jobs has worked with the youth before, and Arda Güler obviously getting his debut under Vitor Pereira. And I'm by no means saying Mateus Mane is going to be half the player Arda Güler's come to be. If he is, we're very
No,
lucky.
he's going to be better.
But
No,
you get
I
a lot of
wish.
hype around him. Was he? Am I right in saying he got selected for the England and the Portugal sides?
Yeah, play for both of them at under 20 level.
Yeah, so I'll let you take this away, as I know you were very excited to get on to Mateus Mane.
Yeah, very excited by Mateus Mane as a prospect. Obviously, I've always been a massive fan of younger players coming through any club. I'm a massive fan of Wonder Kids for all UFM players. And Mateus Mane certainly fits the bill. Very happy. I completely agree with Jacob in saying that this sets a statement for all players in the club's academy. Obviously, if they're good enough, they're old enough in my eyes, and obviously in Vitor Pereira's eyes too. With him saying in his post-match press conference how much he's been impressed by Mateus Mane and that he will be a permanent member of the first team squad going forwards for the rest of the season, which is something we love to see. Lots of desire shown by the youngster when he came on, flying for his first contribution in Wolfshire, flying in to try and win a header against the big, tough, burly Brighton centre-half at the end of the day. And that's what you want. Signs of no fear shown by the youngster despite his age, and that's the most you can really ask for. I thought certain players driving forwards, obviously trying to find that equaliser, put him in a bit of an awkward position. He ended up kind of left back sometimes, kind of centre mid sometimes, whereas the kid's a striker. Obviously been very prolific for Wolves in the academy, scoring 4 goals in one game off the bench, if I'm not mistaken. And then playing in another game later that day. Just what a player. Really excited to see how he develops. Obviously, he can declare for both England or Portugal as well. Those are 2 very good footballing nations to have under your belt, caps-wise. So very excited to see what comes of him and other lads who may get the call-up from the academy.
Yeah, there's obviously other prospects. When you mentioned Mateus Mane 4 goals, was that him or was that Greenwood? Because I know he played for 2 teams in one day as well.
It might have been Greenwood. I'm not sure. I can't really recall.
Yeah, but it's one of them. And so obviously he might be one we see in the future. Obviously Wesley Okadua getting a few goes on the bench last year, never actually got to come on. We also have players like Harry Whistle, who's always done well. Has he been released now? I don't know whether he's still.
No, he's on loan.
Yeah, and who else? We've got Alfie Pond, who's obviously made a few appearances this year. We've got players there who I think pre-season will be a big teller of whether they're going to be around next year. Because with a manager like Vitor Pereira, if you're good enough, you're going to be old enough, I think. And he will give you a chance. But to end the positives there, we were simply beaten by a better team on Saturday. I think a typical end of season Wolves match felt like after the excitement. Maybe one disappointing aspect of Mateus's debut was that half the crowd had left by the time he got on, which I personally was very vocal about in the ground, that we've been on very good form. We in December we thought these last 3 games would have been die or survive. It seemed like they'd be nail biters, and simply we're fortunate in the fact that these players can afford to be on the beach if that's what you're taking out of these games. And I think if you're going to leave early, then there's simply no reason for you to be there. You support the team whether we win or whether we lose. I think maybe I'm getting too wound up about an issue that isn't really there, but I don't like seeing empty seats when our team has simply put a lot in the last few weeks. It hasn't gone our way in one game against ultimately a better team. They've got better owners. They've got probably better backroom staff, a better run club. Ultimately, they're going to be better than us, I think, at the end of the day.
I'd like to also add that I think it's unfair for fans to be criticising players about being on the beach when they're clearly trying to get back home themselves very early. The Brighton second goal, while it killed any chance of us getting anything from the game with how late it wasn't exactly that late. And the whole ground was empty before the full-time whistle even went. And while we always criticise the North Bank, and as does every Wolves fan, they weren't the only stand doing it. Even the South Bank, Steeple, Upper, And honestly, I think that Billy Wright was the most full by the end. Whether that was because of the kids clamoring with their signs trying to get players' shirts or not, I just thought it's a bad look for the club when we're getting outsung and like out attendance at home by the end of the game by Brighton, who are, no offence to them, whilst they have become a bigger club in recent years, they are a small club at the end of the day. And I was quite frankly embarrassed by it. However, yeah, not the best evening from Wolves as a whole. Fan base or not, let's just get behind the team for the last two games. A very, very tough ask next against Crystal Palace.
Yeah, but as is always the case with Wolves around this time of year, so much talk goes on behind the scenes, but usually not enough action. And hopefully this will be different this summer. But it seems like we're going to see more outgoings earlier on in the window than we will incomings. Interestingly, Ryan Nori this week changing his agent, which 9 times out of 10 is an indicator of a transfer. But we spoke about this behind the scenes. I'm going to let you give your opinion first. I'm not too sure that's the case here. What about you?
I'm on the contrast. Not too pleased about the news. Obviously, John Percy breaking reports that Ryan Nuri is seeking to be extended his contract with the club. The club obviously working on that behind the scenes and want to time down to a longer deal. How this will work in combination with the factors we've spoke about recently on the podcast with Hugo Bueno and other possible players like Rodrigo at left back. We're yet to see how that will all turn out. However, I do think tying Nuri down to a new contract would be a brilliant bit of business. Sorry. We obviously don't want one of our other star players leaving this window if Mateus Cunha is going to do so himself. However, if you do think there is going to be a second Wolves prominent departure, your money would also be on Nuri to be that player, given everything we've spoke about in the past few weeks. Obviously, Ryan Nuri's previous managerial agency was Gestut, Jorge Mendes' agency. Whether this is a good sign, because Wolves have been looking to cut their ties with Mendes to an extent, and means he wants to stay, or it could easily very well be the opposite and be a bad sign if, obviously, Wolves, still being close with Mendes at the end of the day, have said, we want to tie Ryan down to a new deal. And Ryan's gone, no, I don't want to do that, to his agent. And he goes, I'm just going to go and sign with a different agency. Because I want my summer move. That could also be the case. At the end of the day, from our side as fans, it's all just speculation, and we have to wait for the media to break the truth. But we can certainly talk about it here. Jacob, what is your view about it?
I think it's rather cloudy at the minute as to what it is. Obviously, as you mentioned, Jorge Mendes, who's a name that will be bittersweet with many Wolves fans. Obviously, responsible for a lot of our best signings the last few years, but also responsible for a lot of our worst. And, there's been reports that we're trying to move away from Mendes, as we say, but there's also stuff like him turning up to the training ground, whether that was a last goodbye to many players, whether that was new negotiations with players. We heard it was a lot to do with negotiations-wise. However, the one thing that has me hopeful is Jorge Mendes has never been one for loyalty as such. So I don't think he would have been pushing too hard for Aït-Nouri to be signing a new contract. I think this agency thing is Aït-Nouri almost in a way of trying to demand more in his contract. I'd probably say he's my best bet. Most likely will want a release clause in there. But I think it's more the fact that he wants an agent that's got his best interests at heart, that's got... I think it would be a long-winded process with Aït-Nouri now this has happened. I think he and his agent will spend weeks, if not months, overlooking what is the best plan of action here. Do you stay at Wolves? Do you go on to somewhere else? But I don't think... This Ryan's been a character who's ultimately comes across very laid back, very relaxed, but has ultimately given a lot to his football club in his 4 years here. Yeah. And I don't think he'll end it in a bad way. I think it'll be, if the terms are right, he will sign a new contract. I fully believe that. But it's just whether we trust Jeff Shee and Fosun and Matt Hobbs to tie him down to a contract that doesn't have a stupidly cheap release clause. I've always made quite vocal that I'm not happy with the figure on Mateus's release clause. I think it was a
Yeah, I think
stupid
that's a
thing.
robbery.
I think it's a stupid thing to add, considering the guy had 2 years left in his contract anyway, and you could have probably asked for more money without that release clause. Or you get an extra year out of Mateus Cunha. I think that was a better option than having him sign his contract ultimately. But with 8-0, I think with future podcasts we'll have a better idea as to what the outcome's going to be. But we will talk about potential incomings a bit more now. This morning reported that, and we're going to get into a lot of names now that I may butcher pronouncing, but we're going to try our best. Thiago Silveiro, £4 million bid apparently rejected for the defender. However, he does have an €8 million release clause. He's only a young lad, 19. So I don't believe he'll be a first teamer, even if he would come in. But I think if Wolves do want him, Cameron, it will be a matter of paying the €8 million release clause. I don't think Wolves will think twice about paying it if it's a player they genuinely want, will they?
No, I wouldn't imagine so. There's been a lot of reports from multiple different sources worldwide linking Wolves to this player, so you do suggest it's one that is truthful in its links. Reports also of Vélez Sarsfield, the club he plays for in Argentina, trying to tie him down to a new contract without this release clause, which obviously for Wolves that would be problematic, as then they can demand even more money than the aforementioned 8 million release clause that's already present. Due to this, though, you would imagine Wolves, if they want this player enough and see him being a long-term investment, surely they should just bite the bullet and pay 8 million, which, while Wolves claim to be so financially tight all the time, that isn't a lot of money in football nowadays in the top flight. So we're yet to see how that one goes. I think he could easily be on the fringes of the first team. Maybe if the likes of Santiago Bueno were to depart, he may want first team football elsewhere where he's not getting it here. He could easily be playing in one of those more backup roles. Nasser Jigger, maybe a loan move or something. We've not seen much of him since he came into the first team. You never know if he's going to take up that spot. Ultimately, it's mostly speculation. Squad could end up shaping in any way. But definitely a player Wolves fans will have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think it's one that would probably, if he did come in, be similar to a Bastian Mwepu situation, where we probably won't see much of him this season, the first season he comes in. However, cast your mind back a few years. Obviously, we see Yerson Mosquera come in from Colombia for not a big fee. I think it was around €10 million or something. He came in for
way less than that. It was about 4-5 million.
Was it? So,
Yeah,
and
proper bargain.
Obviously, we see a great footballer in him if he can stay fit, and someone who we expect to see a lot of next season. So you never know with players like this coming from abroad. I think we'd obviously be pulling more of the eyes if we say we've watched them play, but who knows what they could do coming in. I think there'll obviously be reasons they've been scouted. But moving up the pitch, obviously Saturday made it very clear that, and I think the Man City game before that Wolves need a backup striker, someone who's genuinely a number 9. So if anything happens to Strand Larsen, or even if Strand Larsen, let's say, goes off form or needs a partner, Wolves are linked to 2 players. First of all, a player called Matvey Ponomarenko, a Ukrainian striker from Dynamo Kiev, only 19 years of age once again. His contract does expire in January of next year, so it could be one Wolves look to do on the cheap. But we've also been reportedly having interest in Joaquin Panashili, from currently contracted to Deportivo Alaves, but has spent the season loan at La Liga 2 side Mirandes, who he's got a good return at 20 goals in 36 games. The fees report to be around €20 million. Obviously, neither of these players playing at a high level, you wouldn't say. I can see Cam shaking his head now for our audio listeners, but indicates he's not too keen on these. And I would also rather us probably go for someone who's played at a high level. But if I'm to think out the two who I'd rather take, it would probably be Panashili. I think that return is quite good regardless of the level. He obviously knows where the back of the net is. But I don't think either will be pushing Strand Larsen out of their place, would they, Cam?
No, I'd actually say the opposite. I'd rather have the first one if we can get him on the cheap rather than the second. Wolves obviously very, very tight with our transfer funds. I don't see the point of dishing out 20 million euros on a striker who's only getting good returns in the Spanish second division. That is not the sort of level we should be recruiting from as a club if we have any real ambition to stay in the Premier League, let alone push further up the table like some Wolves fans are hoping for. Not to be harsh on the player, as obviously I've never watched either of them. He could very well be a talented prospect. I just completely agree with what Jacob suggested for my reasons. I think we need someone with top flight experience, whether that's in the Premier League or one of the other top 5 leagues or even any other top European league. I just feel that not playing in the top flight of a football league is something that will ultimately cause you to struggle to adjust when moving to the Premier League itself. As we've seen many times before with many different players. He could easily be a player who goes on to be great, but we need someone who can come in and make a difference now, because most of our signings have been these players with high potential, and if they flop, we look stupid. If they come in and do great, they often get injured and it can affect them, like the case of Yerson Mosquera. So I would rather see us go for someone who is top 5 league proven, who can make a difference, because ultimately if Strang Larsen goes out of form or gets injured, we don't want another Fabio Silva to Raul situation. That's my view of it.
Yeah, and I think that a few weeks ago, a lot of Wolves fans heard the reports of interest in Cameron Archer and Troy Parrott. We all turned our nose up to that as well. And they are 2 players that have played at a much higher level than these 2 players as well. So if we're turning our nose up to them, they are not the level that we desire. I don't think any of the 4 names mentioned are a good thing. I think if we're going to look at that caliber of player, you might as well put your hopes in Sash Kalajic to be fit for the remainder of the season. Yeah, at least you're not losing money then. However, I don't think we should do that. I don't think that guy is ever going to be fit. His football career is probably unfortunately dead in the water at this point, just due to injuries. I think, particularly in the Premier League, I think it'd be too high of intensity for him to play at. But I think I'd rather have him on the bench than someone like a Panamalenko who
100%, because at
played
least
at a high level.
Because at least Sasha knows where the net is and is proven.
Yeah, right.
Despite his injury record, as you say, he's a player who we know is good. He's scored important goals for us. Well, a important goal for us at the Bournemouth win. It's just the man.
That's an important goal.
Yeah, true. He just can't stay fit, and it's sad to see. But yeah, I'd rather also see Sasha be the one getting in the team rather than one of these younger prospects. I just don't think it's for the best interest of the team.
Things with Sasha, we saw obviously that Everton game an important goal. The Bournemouth game an important goal as well. There we are. So that's 3 goals he scored in not much game time under Gary O'Neill. Obviously, far from the footballer we need starting, his overall play leaves a lot to be desired. But if you're a goal down and you've got to launch balls into the box at the end of the game, I'd much rather see Sash Kalajic on the end of them than these 4 names mentioned. But I think that's it for our transfer segment at the moment. I'm sure more rumours will come out as we go through. Obviously, we spoke about Samuel Lino last week. I think that's the most exciting rumour around at the minute, I'd probably say, in terms of incomings. I do want to stress that we spoke about the obviously dire case of the women's team a few weeks ago. Jeff Shee has since come out with a statement saying that he still values his team for stereotypical stuff, and in future we will make it a priority to enrol for the league above, basically saying we're going to do the bare minimum moving forwards. This doesn't really breed confidence in the owner, does it, as we move forward towards this transfer window?
No, for neither team, honestly. Like you say, I think that's absolutely bare minimum the women's team should have already had. They should have been shown a lot more respect from the directors, the owners, and the board. The only slight positive I thought about all of the things was the fact that they're going to have an independent board making the decisions for them from now on, who will have the best interests of the team in mind. However, I'm sure for the ladies in the squad, that will not feel like it's enough. They've been immensely disrespected for their work, and I feel like they've been very hard done by, as do the whole Wolves fan base. So credit to them for the season they've had, but a harsh reminder of who our owners are when this is the state that both squads are looking in going into a big summer for Wolves.
Yeah, but obviously no Wolves this weekend. We play on Tuesday night against Crystal Palace. Will be a tough game. What are your plans for the weekend when Wolves aren't playing? Because it seems like an impossible task to try and fill a weekend without going to Wolves at this point.
Yeah, that Saturday slot is looking a bit empty without having a Wolves game to watch. Working the Sunday, but yeah, Saturday, who knows? Probably just a day of chores. Maybe go meet my friends, something like that. Just not watching football, and it's quite unfortunate. However, I'm pretty sure we do have some FA Cup action to look forward to.
If I'm not Saturday, isn't it?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken.
And there are any of the playoff finals next weekend or not?
Not too sure. I'd have to check. I think it's the weekend after though.
Yeah, probably, because I doubt they have it on the same weekend as if it comes final, because they usually have a Saturday
Yeah.
Sunday slot, don't they? But yeah, that's all for this week. I've been your host, Jacob Jones. Thank you to Cam and Gorman once again for joining me.
Thank you, Jacob.
We'll be back on the Wednesday next week. A new filming slot, as obviously we're playing on Tuesday. So that'll be episode 26 and the penultimate episode of the season. But this has been the South Bank Podcast, and thank you for watching.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.
The voice of a new generation. This is KIC Radio.